What happens when there is no self in Buddhism? What if everything you believed about yourself was an illusion? What if the I you cling to so tightly never really existed? And if there is no self, then who, or what, becomes enlightened? This question has puzzled spiritual seekers for centuries. Yet it holds the key to understanding the very nature of existence. Today, we will embark on an in-depth exploration of Buddhist wisdom, challenging our perceptions, unraveling deep-seated beliefs, and ultimately, discovering the transformative power of awakening. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Identity. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to believe in an individual identity. Society, culture, family, all reinforce the idea of me, myself, and mine. We build an intricate web of self-image based on our experiences, memories, desires, and fears. Yet, what if this self is nothing more than a construct, a story we tell ourselves? What if it is merely an illusion, as fleeting as a dream? The fluidity of the self. Buddhism presents a radical perspective. The self is not an entity but a process. We do not possess a permanent, only ever-changing patterns of thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. This concept is embodied in the doctrine of anatta, non-self, which challenges the deeply ingrained notion of an independent and enduring identity. Imagine a river. At any given moment, the water in the river is in motion, never static, yet, we give it a name, the river, as if it were a fixed entity. Similarly, our identity is nothing but a stream of consciousness, a continuous flow of sensations, ideas, and reactions. The moment we try to grasp it, it changes. This perspective may seem unsettling. After all, if there is no stable self, who is living this life? Who is experiencing joy and suffering? Who seeks enlightenment? The ego and the fabrication of reality. The illusion of identity is deeply tied to the ego. The ego is the storyteller, the entity that we believe is us. It clings to memories, constructs narratives about who we are, and fears dissolution. It seeks validation, control, and permanence in an impermanent world. But the Buddha taught that suffering arises when we attach ourselves to this illusory self. When we believe in an unchanging I, we become vulnerable to pride, fear, and craving. We fear death because we think it is the annihilation of me. We crave recognition because we believe it affirms our worth. We suffer because we resist the natural flow of change. However, when we begin to see through this illusion, we unlock the potential for liberation. We realize that our suffering is not inherent but the result of misidentification. We are not the thoughts in our mind, nor the emotions that come and go. We are not our past nor the fears of the future. The dissolution of self in meditation. Meditation is one of the most direct ways to experience the illusion of identity. In deep states of mindfulness, we begin to witness how thoughts arise and disappear without a true owner. We see emotions surge and fade like waves in the ocean, without a fixed entity behind them. In the practice of vipassana, insight meditation, we observe reality as it is, impermanent, unsatisfactory, and empty of self. When we sit in silence, watching the breath or the sensations in our body, we realize that what we call I is just a collection of transient phenomena. At first, this realization may feel uncomfortable, but as we deepen our practice, a profound sense of peace emerges. Without a rigid self to protect or defend, we become lighter. Without attachment to identity, we move through life with greater ease and openness. The implications of non-self in daily life. Understanding the illusion of identity is not just a philosophical exercise, it has practical implications for how we live. When we stop clinging to the notion of a fixed self, we become less reactive. Insults and praise lose their power over us because we no longer take them personally. We let go of comparisons. Without a rigid ego to defend, We no longer measure our worth against others. We cultivate compassion, seeing that others are also caught in the illusion of identity. We become more understanding and forgiving. We embrace impermanence. Change no longer threatens us. It becomes a natural and beautiful unfolding of existence. Who is seeking enlightenment? If there is no permanent self, then who seeks enlightenment? This is a question that has puzzled practitioners for centuries. The answer is paradoxical. While there is no inherent I, there is still the unfolding of awareness. The search for enlightenment is not about a self attaining something, rather, it is the process of letting go of illusions. It is like waking from a dream, not by someone waking up, but by awareness recognizing its own nature. When the illusion of identity dissolves, what remains is pure presence, beyond labels, beyond attachment, beyond suffering. It is not an annihilation but a return to the vast, boundless nature of being. Thus, dismantling the illusion of selfhood is not a loss but a liberation. It is the opening of a door that was never locked, the realization that we were never truly confined to begin with. Chapter 2. The Five Aggregates, the Illusion of Self. The Buddha dissected human existence into 5 aggregates, skandhas, revealing that what we consider the self is merely a collection of ever-changing elements. 1. Form, rupa, our physical body and the material world. 2. Feeling, vedana, the sensations, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, that arise from experiences. 3. Perception, sanya, the recognition and labeling of experiences. 4. Mental formations, sankhara, thoughts, desires, habits, and intentions. 5. Consciousness, vijnana, the awareness of experience. These aggregates interact constantly, giving the illusion of continuity. Yet, they are ever-changing, like a river that appears the same but is never composed of the same water. The self is nothing more than the temporary alignment of these factors. The illusion of continuity. The mind clings to the idea of a stable, unchanging self, yet upon closer examination, no such entity exists. Consider a flame burning from one moment to the next. It appears continuous, but in reality, it is a series of ever-changing chemical reactions. Similarly, what we call I is not a singular entity but a dynamic process of arising and ceasing. Each of the 5 aggregates is impermanent. Our body, form, ages and deteriorates. Our feelings shift from pleasure to discomfort. Our perceptions evolve as we gain knowledge or experience new perspectives. Our thoughts, habits, and emotions fluctuate daily. Even our consciousness flickers like a candle in the wind, momentarily aware, then gone. Despite this, we cling to the illusion that a core self exists, much like how we perceive a wave as an entity, even though it is merely the movement of water. The chariot analogy and its deeper meaning. Imagine a chariot. It consists of wheels, a frame, and a seat, yet, none of these individually is the chariot. The chariot exists only as a conceptual combination of parts. If we remove the wheels, is it still a chariot? If we take away the frame, does it remain the same? Likewise, our sense of self is a mental construct. We assume continuity in our identity because our mind stitches together fragmented moments of experience. But upon examination, we find that this I is nothing more than a shifting network of conditions. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises when we mistake this impermanent collection for a fixed self. The more we cling to an illusory I, the more we fear loss, aging, and death. The more we identify with emotions and thoughts, the more we are swept away by them. Breaking free from attachment. If there is no core self, what happens to responsibility and karma? The Buddha did not deny the law of cause and effect. Instead, he emphasized that actions, karma, create conditions for future experiences. Just as a seed grows into a tree without a fixed essence, Our choices shape our journey, even if the self undergoing change is never the same from moment to moment. Liberation comes when we stop clinging to the aggregates as me or mine. When we see thoughts as just thoughts, emotions as passing waves, and identity as a mirage, we experience profound freedom. We no longer react blindly, and suffering loses its grip on us. Through meditation and mindfulness, we observe the aggregates as they arise and fade. We realize that there is no fixed I to defend, no past to regret, and no future to grasp. In this clarity, we find peace, not by strengthening the illusion of self, but by letting it dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Chapter 3. The Nature of Impermanence, Anicca. Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent. Our bodies age, our emotions fluctuate, our thoughts arise and dissolve. No aspect of our experience is fixed. Yet, we resist this truth. We cling to our sense of identity, fearing that without it, we will be nothing. This attachment leads to suffering, as we try to hold on to things that inevitably change. The illusion of stability. Our minds are wired to seek stability. We assume that the people in our lives, our emotions, and even our own selves will remain the same. But impermanence, anicca, is the fundamental nature of existence. A flower blooms and withers. A mountain erodes over centuries. And even the stars eventually burn out. On a personal level, the body we inhabit today is not the same as the one we had years ago. Our cells regenerate. Our thoughts shift, and our emotions ebb and flow like the tides. Yet, we cling to relationships, material possessions, and identities as if they were permanent. We fear loss, not realizing that change is the essence of life. This fear manifests as suffering, dukkha, which arises when we resist the natural flow of impermanence. The cycle of attachment and suffering. Imagine holding onto a handful of sand. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. Similarly, the more we attach ourselves to impermanent things, wealth, relationships, youth, power, the more we set ourselves up for disappointment. The moment we recognize that all things are transient, we begin to release the weight of our attachments. For example, we suffer when a loved one leaves us, when our body weakens with age, or when circumstances shift unexpectedly. But these pains do not come from impermanence itself. They arise because we resist it. If we accept change as a natural law, suffering loses its power over us. Observing impermanence in everyday life. By deeply observing impermanence, we begin to loosen our grip on the illusion of self. When we see that everything flows like a river, we stop trying to freeze the water. In meditation, we witness thoughts appearing and disappearing like clouds in the sky. No thought stays forever. Similarly, emotions rise and fall. Anger surges but eventually fades. Happiness blossoms but also passes. Even pain, no matter how intense, is temporary. When we apply this wisdom to life, we live with greater ease. We appreciate moments of joy without clinging, face challenges without despair, and navigate relationships with understanding rather than possession. Love becomes more profound when we do not seek to own or control. Loss becomes less painful when we do not demand permanence. The liberation of letting go. Understanding impermanence does not mean detachment from life, rather, it allows us to engage more fully and freely. When we no longer grasp at what is fleeting, we experience the present moment with clarity and peace. Impermanence teaches us that suffering is not found in change itself, but in our resistance to it. The more we align with the truth of anicca, the more we embrace life in its true, ever-changing beauty. Chapter 4. The Process of Awakening. No one becomes enlightened. If there is no permanent self, then how does enlightenment happen? Who experiences it? The Buddha explained that awakening is not something that happens to a person. It is something that happens when the conditions are right. Awakening as a process, not an achievement. Most people think of enlightenment as a goal, a prize to be attained by a seeker. However, the Buddha taught that there is no fixed self to attain enlightenment. Rather, awakening is a process of seeing reality as it truly is, free from illusion, attachment, and suffering. Imagine a wave in the ocean. It rises, moves, and eventually dissolves back into the sea. At no point is it separate from the water. Similarly, awakening is not about transforming a personal self into something divine. It is about realizing that the self was never truly separate to begin with. The illusion of becoming. In the conditioned world, we are trapped by the illusion of becoming. We believe that happiness, wisdom, or enlightenment is something we must achieve through effort. But true wisdom arises not from struggle, but from letting go. Consider a flower blooming. It does not struggle to open. When the sunlight, rain, and soil conditions align, it naturally blossoms. Similarly, when ignorance dissolves, wisdom unfolds effortlessly. Just as darkness disappears when a lamp is lit, suffering vanishes when the causes of delusion are removed. Thus, enlightenment is not something attained by an individual, but rather a natural unfolding when conditions are right. The principle of dependent origination. This is the principle of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. Everything arises due to conditions, and nothing exists independently. The self, suffering, and even enlightenment are not independent entities but are woven into the fabric of causes and effects. The cycle of suffering, samsara, continues because of attachment, craving, and ignorance, but when these conditions cease, liberation naturally occurs. There is no separate I that attains freedom. There is only the cessation of illusion. What changes in awakening? If enlightenment is not a personal achievement, then what actually changes? The mind becomes unburdened. The clinging to I and mine dissolves. Fear, anger, and craving no longer dictate actions. Before awakening, we are like people caught in a dream, believing the dream is real, reacting to it with joy and sorrow. Upon awakening, we realize the dream-like nature of existence. The world still appears the same, but the attachment to it is gone. This realization brings profound peace. A person who is awakened still walks, eats, and interacts with the world, but without suffering. They no longer seek happiness in fleeting things nor resist the natural flow of impermanence. Living without a self. To ordinary perception, the idea of no self seems frightening, but for the awakened one, it is liberation. Without a fixed self to defend or protect, there is no need for conflict, no grasping, no fear. Life flows effortlessly, like a river that does not struggle against its course. The Buddha once said, "Just as the ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so too does my teaching have one taste, the taste of liberation." Enlightenment is not something that belongs to someone, it is simply the absence of illusion. Like the sun appearing when the clouds dissolve, awakening is not something gained, but something revealed. Chapter 5. Seeing through the illusion, the role of awareness. If the self is an illusion, what remains? Awareness. Not an entity, not a person, not a me, but pure, boundless awareness. It is the open space in which experiences arise and fade. The nature of awareness. Imagine the sky. Clouds appear and vanish, but the sky itself remains untouched. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations pass through awareness, but awareness itself is not a thing. It is simply the openness in which everything unfolds. Most people mistake themselves for their thoughts and emotions. When anger arises, they say, "I am angry." When sadness appears, they say, "I am sad." But are they truly these transient emotions? If we examine closely, we see that emotions and thoughts come and go, yet something remains unchanged. the knowing of them. This knowing is awareness itself. The Buddha described awareness as luminous and ever-present. It does not cling to experiences, nor is it defined by them. Whether joy or sorrow arises, awareness is simply the silent witness. The illusion of identification. The illusion of self arises because we identify with mental and physical phenomena. When we think, we assume there is a thinker behind the thoughts. When we feel emotions, we believe there is a me who owns them. But upon deeper inquiry, we see that these experiences arise and dissolve on their own. There is no thinker apart from the thought, no separate self apart from the experience. Just as waves arise on the surface of the ocean but are not separate from the water. Thoughts and emotions appear within awareness but do not belong to any I. They are passing movements, not a fixed identity. Observing without attachment. By cultivating mindfulness, we begin to observe without attachment. Instead of saying, I am angry, we recognize, anger is arising. Instead of saying, I am afraid, we see, fear is present. This subtle shift in perspective transforms our relationship with experience. We no longer react blindly but witness each moment as it is. Through meditation, we train ourselves to rest in awareness. Instead of being lost in thoughts, we recognize them as passing phenomena. Instead of being overwhelmed by emotions, we see them as fleeting patterns. Slowly, the illusion of a separate self dissolves, leaving only the clarity of presence. The gateway to liberation. Realizing this is the gateway to liberation. When we no longer grasp at identity, suffering fades, fear loses its grip, for there is no fixed self to protect. Craving dissolves, for there is no separate I that lacks anything. Awareness itself is already complete. It does not seek, does not resist. It is like a vast sky, open, spacious, and free. This realization is not something we acquire, it is something we recognize. The self was never real to begin with. When we stop searching for ourselves in thoughts and sensations, we awaken to the ever-present, boundless nature of awareness. Chapter 6. Living without a self, the nature of liberation. When we see through the illusion of self, something profound happens. We are no longer bound by personal desires, fears, and attachments. We live in the world but are not confined by it. Freedom beyond identification. Without clinging to a fixed identity, we become fluid, like water taking the shape of whatever vessel it enters. Joy and sorrow still arise, but they are no longer mine. They are simply experiences passing through awareness. Just as the wind does not belong to the sky, thoughts and emotions do not belong to a self. This realization dissolves suffering at its root. Fear loses its grip, for there is no separate self to protect. Craving fades, for there is nothing missing. The mind, no longer grasping, becomes clear and open, like a vast, boundless space. The deep engagement with life. Liberation is not an escape, it is a radical openness to life as it is. It is experiencing joy without clinging, sorrow without resistance, and existence without a fixed center. Far from detachment or indifference, this state of being fosters deep connection. When there is no self to defend, we meet others with true compassion. We do not love out of need but out of genuine care. We do not seek control but allow things to unfold naturally. Even in action, there is effortlessness, a musician lost in music, a dancer flowing with movement. This is the way of liberation. There is doing, but no doer. Life moves through us, and we become one with it. Compassion without ego. This does not mean passivity. On the contrary, it leads to greater compassion and engagement with the world, because we no longer act from selfish motives, but from a place of genuine connection. Without the illusion of separation, we see all beings as ourselves. Their suffering is our suffering, their joy, our joy. Compassion flows naturally, without judgment or expectation. Acts of kindness arise not from obligation but from the simple recognition of shared existence. Thus, living without a self is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is a life free, unburdened, deeply connected. It is walking through the world with open hands, with nothing to hold onto, yet embracing everything. Chapter 7. The final teaching, diligence, not attainment. In his final words, the Buddha did not tell his disciples to seek enlightenment. Instead, he said, "Be diligent." Enlightenment is not an achievement. It is a realization that unfolds naturally when we see things clearly. The illusion of attainment. Most people believe that enlightenment is something to be reached, like a distant peak to conquer. But the Buddha's teaching is clear: there is nothing to attain, only illusions to remove. We do not become enlightened, rather, we awaken to the truth that was always present. Just as the sun is always shining behind the clouds, wisdom and clarity are already here, obscured only by ignorance, attachment, and distraction. The path is not about gaining something new but clearing away what prevents us from seeing reality as it is. Diligence as the path. So we practice, not to become enlightened, but to remove the obstacles that prevent us from seeing the truth that is already here. This is why the Buddha emphasized diligence, because clarity does not come from wishful thinking but from sustained awareness and mindful living. Diligence means watching the mind, understanding its patterns, and patiently letting go of craving and aversion. It is the daily effort to stay present, to respond with wisdom instead of reactivity, and to cultivate stillness amidst the turbulence of life. Effort without striving. Diligence does not mean force or struggle. A flower does not try to bloom. It simply unfolds when conditions are right. Similarly, awakening happens not through striving but through allowing wisdom to arise by removing delusion, allowing peace to emerge by releasing grasping. This is the paradox of the path. We must walk it with dedication, yet without clinging to the idea of a destination. The journey itself is the realization. Thus, the Buddha's final teaching was not a command to seek something outside of ourselves, but a reminder to be present, to be mindful, and to continue the practice with unwavering diligence. Liberation is not in the future, it is here, now, for those who are ready to see. Conclusion. Who attains enlightenment? No one. And yet, when illusion dissolves, only enlightenment remains. The paradox of awakening. The search for enlightenment is, in itself, an illusion, because there is no fixed self to attain it. The one who seeks is merely a collection of thoughts, perceptions, and experiences, constantly shifting like waves on the ocean. When we deeply investigate this sense of I, we find that it is empty of any true essence. And in that very realization, the struggle to attain something disappears. There is nothing to reach, no one to become, only the clear, open awareness that has always been here. Freedom beyond identity. True liberation is not about gaining knowledge or mystical experiences. It is about seeing through the deception of selfhood. The greatest illusion is the belief that we are separate, that we must achieve something to be complete. The greatest freedom is realizing that we were never bound to begin with. Like clouds drifting across the sky, thoughts and identities come and go, but the vast openness remains untouched. As the scene fades to an endless sky, the final words echo softly. Not knowing who we are is the greatest illusion. Seeing through it is the greatest freedom.